Dear children, today we are going to study Resources and Development, Chapter 1 of Geography, Class 10. And in this chapter, we are going to learn something about the resources and its classification. Furthermore, going into the depth of the chapter, you are all going to learn the development of resources and the resource planning in India. You will also come to know about the land resources and the classification of different types of soils found in India. And we are going to learn all these things in two parts. Primarily in the first part of this audio, you are going to know more about the resources and their planning. So let's begin in part A, something about resources. You all know that whatever is found in our environment, they are all going to be used only to satisfy our needs and is also technologically accessible, economically feasible and culturally accepted. So we term it as resources. See, human beings themselves are very essential components of these resources. Normally, they transform material available in the environment into the resources which are usable and use these resources to satisfy their needs. Now, the resources which are available on this earth in and around our environment have been classified. So, let us now see in how many ways the resources can be classified. Now, there are certain bases of classifications. The very first basis is the basis of origin, and we call it biotic and abiotic. Then comes the basis of exhaustibility. The resources are renewable and non-renewable. On the basis of ownership, we call the resources which are sometimes individual, sometimes the resources are of community, sometimes we call it the national resources, and notwithstanding even the international resources. When we talk about the basis of the status of a development, so resources are the potential resources, developed stock and reserves. So, on the basis of origin, first of all, we need to understand what is the difference between the biotic and abiotic resources. Dear children, whatever we obtain from the biosphere and the resources in which we have life, say for example human beings, the flora and the fauna, fishery, the livestock, etc., they are termed as biotic resources. Contrary to this, abiotic resources are all those things which are composed of non-living things. Say for example, the rocks available on this earth or the metals that we find within the earth, they are abiotic resources. Now let's see the basis of exhaustibility. The resources are in two forms available. One, those which are renewable, and other resources which are non-renewable. The resources which can be renewed or reproduced by physical, chemical or mechanical processes, they are also replenishable. We call it renewable resources. Now, these resources may further be divided into continuous or flow. Let us take up an example. Solar and wind energy, water, forests and wildlife, etc. are the renewable resources. Now, coming to non-renewable resources, we come to know that these resources occur over a very long geological time. They take millions of years in their formation, and some of these resources like metals are recyclable and some, like fossil fuels, can never be recycled and they get exhausted with their use. The best examples are minerals and fossil fuels. Now let's understand, on the basis of ownership, individual, community, national and international resources. Individual resources are owned privately by individuals. Say for example, the village people, they own their lands. When you come to the urban areas, people have their own plots or their own houses, their bungalows and other properties that they own. So these are the individual resources. Now, under the individual resources come plantation, pasture lands, ponds, water in wells, so on and so forth. Furthermore, there are some resources which are owned by a community. Such resources are free to be accessible to all the members of the community they belong. Say for example, the grounds which are there open for grazing of the cattle, the grounds which are used for the burial of the dead bodies, public parks, the spots which are earmarked as picnic spots, the playgrounds, etc. These are community owned resources. Now let's see national resources. Now this is one kind of resources which are owned by a nation or a country. Say whatever we find in our country in the form of minerals, in the form of water, the widespread green belt of forests, the wildlife, the land within the political boundaries and the area which is up to the 12 nautical miles in the ocean from the coastal region. They are also termed as territorial water. They all belong to nation. So national resources are, for example, roads, canals, railways, etc. Let's see what are the resources which are termed international resources. They are regulated by international institutions. The oceanic resources beyond 200 nautical miles of the exclusive economic zone belong to open ocean, and no individual country can utilize these without the concurrence of international institutions. So they need to seek permission to use the area in the ocean beyond 12 nautical miles, that is equivalent to 22.2 kilometers. So we have to be very clear about it, that on the basis of international concurrence, these resources can be utilized by any nation, otherwise not. Now let's take up the basis which is of the status of development. Now sometimes potential developed stocks and reserves do come under this. When we talk about potential resources, they are the resources which are found in a region but have not been utilized as such. So let us take up an example of Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now these two states have enormous potential for the development of wind and solar energy, but so far these have not been developed properly, so they are potential resources, however not being used for any purpose. Another resources are the developed resources which are surveyed and their quality and quantity have been determined for utilization. Now the development of resources depends largely on technology and the level of their feasibility. So whatever materials we find in the environment which have the potential to satisfy the human needs, but human beings do not have the appropriate technology to access these, we call it stock. Now say For example, hydrogen can be used as a rich resource of energy, but we do not have advanced technology to use it, and hence it is the stock resource. Now let's understand reserves. Reserves basically are the subset of the stock which can be put into use with the help of existing technical know-how, but their use has not been started. These can be used for meeting future requirements. Say the water available in the dams, the forests, they are reserved. They are reserved for the future use. So till now we have understood the basis on which the resources can be classified. Further, we are going to understand something about the development of resources in terms of their utility by the human beings. Now, what has happened? The resources which are easily available in the environment, by and large, by the passage of time, have been used by human beings so indiscriminately that this led to the following problems. Now, let us see the problems. Depletion of resources for satisfying the greed of a few individuals. Now then, accumulation of resources in a few hands, which in turn divided the society into two segments. Some of them turned out to become rich and some of them turned out to become poor. And this excessive use of resources has also led to the global ecological crisis, such as global warming, ozone layer depletion, environmental pollution, and the degradation of land. So, in order to save the resources from being indiscriminately used by the people, there is a need for the resource planning. And also, it is essential for the sustainable existence of all forms of life. So, what we did, sustainable economic development came into existence, which means development should take place without damaging the environment, and development in the present should not compromise with the needs of future generations. This is how the resource planning came into existence. In India, we find some of the regions which can be considered self-sufficient in terms of availability of the resources, and there are a few regions which have acute shortage of even the vital resources. So this is a kind of imbalance, and hence a call for balanced resource planning at the national, state, regional and local levels was given. Resource planning in India is a very complex process. Now, what does it include? Let us see it one by one. The resource planning in India involves the identification and inventory of resources across the regions of the country, and this involves surveying, mapping, and qualitative and quantitative estimation and measurement of the resources. Secondly, it involves the evolving a planning structure which should be endowed with appropriate technology and should be assisted by the skill and the institutional setup for implementing the resource development plans. Thirdly, this resource planning also involves matching the resource development plans with overall national development plans. So, to sum up, resources can contribute to development only and only when these resources are accompanied by appropriate technological development and institutional changes. So, India for a long time has been making concerted efforts towards achieving the goals of resource planning, right from the first 5-year plan launched after independence. To overcome irrational consumption and overutilization of resources, resource conservation at various levels also is important. Now let us see one of the major resources, we call it land resources. Dear children, you all know that land is a natural resource and it is of utmost importance in life. What does it support? Land basically supports natural vegetation, wildlife, human life, all sorts of economic activities, transportation and communication systems largely depend on land resource. And surprisingly, India has land under a variety of relief features. As earlier in class 9 you must have read that the relief features in India are of all qualities, all varieties. We have got mountains, plateaus, plains, islands, everything. So let us understand that in India the relief features 43% are the plains, 30% of the land comes under mountains, and we have got another 27% of plateaus. How to utilize this land resource? Now, land resources are used for various purposes. There are many such purposes that we have to understand and further, make use of it. The first purpose is the forest. Second is land not available for cultivation. Third, barren and wasteland, land put to non-agricultural uses. Fourth, fallow lands. Fifth, other uncultivated lands, which excludes fallow land. And sixth, net sown area. This is the land utilization for the purposes we have, and the use of land has got a different pattern in India. It is determined on the basis of two very important factors. First, it is the physical factor, say for example, topography, climatic condition, the types of soil available. And the second is their human factors such as population density, technological capability, and culture and traditions. Now let us see the use of land pattern that we have in our country. General land use categories which were there in 1960-61, and another general land use categories that we are talking about 2014-15. So to say so, it's a difference of something around 50 years. Reporting area will always be there, considered 100% in that. So in the year 1960-61, the forest area was 18.11%, whereas in 2014-15, the forest area increased to 23.3%. When we talk about the area under non-agricultural uses in 1960-61, it was 46.26%, whereas in 2014-15, it came down to 45.5%. Let us talk about net sown area, which was 4.95% in the year 1960-61. That increased a lot, almost doubled in the year 2014-15 with 8.7%. We talk about the permanent pasture and grazing land, which was 4.71% in the year 1960-61, which decreased in 2014-15 and it came down to 3.3%. We talk about the fallow, which was 3.50% in 1960-61. Comparatively, it remained the same in 2014-15 at 3.6%. 6.23% was the cultivable wasteland. This wasteland came down in 2014-15 to a level of 4%. Now, we have to see that 3.73% was the current fallow in the year 1960-61, which turned out to become 4.9% in 2014-15. So, to sum up, the wasteland is the land put to other non-agricultural uses. That includes rocky, arid and desert areas, roads, railways, industries, etc. So, continuous use of land over a long period of time without taking appropriate measures to conserve and manage it has literally resulted into land degradation. Dear children, here we stop in part A. Stay tuned with DNA Education on YouTube. We shall see further something about land degradation and conservation measures and soil as a resource in part B. Wait till we come back.